Hey Sugar Geeks, Liz here. Today I'm going to be teaching you something that a lot of people have requested and a lot of people have problems with, and that is covering a square cake in one piece of fondant flawlessly. Coming up next on the Sugar Geek Show. So the first thing you need is a buttercream cake, preferably in the square form. And if you need more information on how to frost and cover your cake in buttercream and get those sharp edges, you can watch the previous video in this series. This has been chilling overnight. It's nice and firm. It's not a hot day, so it can sit here. But if it is a hot day, these corners are the first things to go. If you live in a super hot area, I definitely recommend you use ganache, either white chocolate or chocolate, instead of buttercream, because it's gonna hold up and not sweat in hot conditions. I have my marshmallow fondant ready to go. I've already heated this up in the microwave for 40 seconds. If you need more information on how to prep your fondant, you can watch my video on making fondant. I've got some vegetable shortening on my hands. When you first start kneading fondant, it's usually kind of cracked and dry. That's just the nature of the fondant, at least my fondant. So the vegetable shortening just kind of helps it get soft and smooth and stretchy. And when you're working with a square cake, you definitely want the fondant to be properly prepared. If it's crumbling and cracking, like, you just give up. It's not gonna work for this. So I'm just gonna knead this until I feel like it's got a good amount of stretch to it, which I feel like it does. And then kind of get all of my bubbles and my lines out. It's like bread. Just take all the edges and bring them to the middle. So you have a nice smooth surface to start with. This is 2.5 pounds of fondant, and I'm gonna roll out the entire piece because I want a lot of fondant to work with. And this is just a 6-inch cake, so the bigger your cake, the more fondant you're gonna need to roll out. I really like using my marshmallow fondant, the LMF recipe, but if you want to purchase fondant, some good brands are Renshaw Americas or Karma Masa, really good brands that people recommend. Okay, time to start rolling out. When you're rolling out fondant, you want to keep things round, even though we're covering a square, and you want to rotate often. So I'm just taking my rolling pin, trying to keep things round, and every so often I'm going to unstick it from the table, put down some more cornstarch or powdered sugar, either one is fine. And occasionally you'll see little bubbles pop up. You can just pop those with a pin or an X-Acto blade. And I'm going kind of slow to show you guys the process. Like when I'm really rolling this, I'm like, maybe not that fast, but I'm gonna flip my fondant over. So inevitably, I know somebody's gonna ask me about the whole sweating situation with a cold cake. Like I said, it just depends on your area. I don't have problems with a sweating cake because it's not super hot and humid in Oregon most of the time. And but if you do find problems with your fondant sweating, you can always dust the outside of the fondant with your cornstarch pouch to kind of dry it out, or you can use ganache, which doesn't sweat very much. It's because it doesn't have really much liquid in it. Like pizza dough. All right, so we've rolled our fondant out to about a 1/16 of an inch, nice and thin. The thinner your fondant is, the sharper your corners are gonna be. And let's say the first time you put the fondant over the top of the cake, you mess it up, you can just peel it off, re-knead your fondant. Try not to stress about it. There's nothing in buttercream that's gonna ruin fondant. Sometimes when you take a chilled cake out of the fridge, it's a little bit dry. And this one is a little bit dry, even though it's buttercream. And especially ganache, it will get a little bit dry. So you might have to spray it just a little bit. Otherwise, your fondant won't stick. You definitely need it to stick. Just put a little bit of cornstarch on there. Roll this up onto my rolling pin. Rest that fondant on top of the turntable. That'll help keep it from tearing. And then all the way over. And then the first thing we want to do is kind of smooth out the top with our fondant smoothers. Try not to touch the edges. We just want to take our hands and press just underneath that edge to secure the fondant to the cake so that it doesn't tear. Okay? That's the trickiest part. So we're gonna pay attention to those parts first. Cut around the corners. All right, so now when we're finishing the corners, we're not even really paying attention to the side, it's the corner that's the big deal. So we're gonna take our fondant and pull it and press it onto the corner. And we're pushing the fondant against the cake, we're not pulling it down. And then we're gonna come to the next corner, open that up. So definitely one of the tips is, to focus on the corners first. All right, so then once our cake, all the corners are taken care of, then you can press flat the sides. It doesn't take much. Open that ruffle up and then just press it flat. The nice thing about my fondant is that it gives you a long working time, so you don't have to feel super rushed. And just remember that if you have some imperfections, probably nobody will notice but you. The hardest part was really just getting the actual buttercream cake super square, but once that's square and taken care of, as long as the buttercream's square, then your fondant will be square. Okay, hard part is done. So now I'm just gonna take my fondant smoother and just kind of press down, start rubbing out any bubbles that are in there. If there are any bubbles, then you can just pop them with a pin. You shouldn't be able to really see the pinhole, some people stress about that. It's when it's all said and done, you're not gonna see the pinhole. You'll just naturally have some little marks from when it was stretching, just kind of polishing those out. So let's say it was really sweaty right now. We could take our cornstarch bag and just put that on there. And the cornstarch absorbs moisture. So some people like to use cornstarch, some people like to use powdered sugar. I actually was a powdered sugar user for years and then switched to cornstarch because I feel like it's a little bit smoother. It's not as gritty. I'm gonna trim off my excess fondant about an inch away from the bottom. See all that extra fondant, save that. All right, I'm gonna carefully lift my fondant covered cake off the board. And I'm gonna flip it over, just so I got a little cake board here on top. This doesn't hurt the cake, it's not gonna be in danger. And push all the extra fondant up. You don't have to take this extra step of pushing the fondant up and trimming it and stuff, but this is the way that I do it to get those sharp edges and make it look really nice. So you can either just stop at this point and trim off the extra fondant, or you can go the extra mile if you're team extra. And then you can sharpen the bottom edges by just pressing down, getting that sharp edge back. And just looking at that shadow between the fondant and the cake board. And going all the way around. Just be careful about those corners. They always go soft. Just making sure those corners stay sharp and straight. Right about now, you'll be getting a massive back cramp. That's the worst part. All right, I think that looks pretty good. I have a brand new razor blade here. This is gonna work the best for trimming off the fondant and getting a nice sharp edge. I'm just gonna place that right under, hold it just level with the cake board, and it just slices that off perfectly, and it's so satisfying. And then if you have any sort of gaps, you know, where the fondant's not all the way down to the board, you can push that down. This is one of those things that I never really understood for the longest time when I was looking at professional, you know, cakes. Like, how do they hide the board? So all of my cakes would have little ribbons around the bottom, which is so 1995. All right, guys, that is how you cover a square cake in one piece of fondant flawlessly. Go ahead and give it a try yourself. If you have any problems, leave me a comment, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye. This was pretty good. I haven't covered a square cake in forever.